Jessica, who should feel most slighted by version 1.0 of the college football playoff rankings?
Oh man, that's a good question. To be honest, was kind of afraid I was going to get on the Zoom today and everyone was going to yell at me. So I guess I assumed Miami fans would feel that way to answer your question.
Why is that? Why would you say that?
Because they're all the way down at 18. I think that SMU loss was not the kind of loss they could afford to have. I think had they waited to lose to Pitt at the end of the season, it might have been a different story.
Well, and don't forget, Gino thinks the refs stole that game.
Yeah.
You know what? Let me just say this. I saw a lot of the complaining about the officiating in the Miami SMU game, and I understand. I think the officiating across the board in college football this year has been pretty bad. There's been a number of, Wake Forest got totally screwed in their game against Georgia Tech earlier this season. There's been so many calls this season. The Auburn-Georgia game. Did you guys talk about the Kirby Smart timeout thing, the clapping,
yeah,
that whole thing?
That
was quite a charade.
Auburn, Oklahoma was a good show. I know Dabo is accusing refs of betting on games after the PI in Clemson. Duke. Officiating is bad everywhere.
It's bad everywhere, and I don't think that, I think that Miami fans have a point. I kind of see where the refs were going with the specific roughing the passer call after the whistle. He did hit him really hard. But that being said, it is bad everywhere. It does affect everyone. How your head coach handles it, whether or not he blames the refs in the postgame or takes the high road, that matters too, I think, to the teams, that they are able to not feel like they were cheated by it and can stay focused, et cetera. But I do think that there's significant complaints that can be made this season on college football officiating.
I do disagree that losing the last game of the season would have been better for Miami, because we have an example of that just last year where they lost.
Yeah, I know. You're right.
Last game of the season. I'm actually encouraged that they have a month to work, because the committee already kind of tipped their hand in that they need to see more consistency from Miami. Every other example in the top 25, when there was a head-to-head matchup where teams had the same ranking, all the teams that won the game were ranked higher than the loser, except for one instance, Miami. But I do not blame them. Miami has played one good half in the last month. If Miami goes 4-0, they will have a solid argument. College football is nutty in November. We'll see then. But right now, Miami is zero to complain about. They got to handle their business. There's not going to be anything more difficult than winning 4 games.
And if I could just jump in real quick here too, Jess. All right, so let's say Miami finishes 4-0 and they look good in the process. You want Miami to then be included in the college football playoff, but then you also have to give into the idea that the only way they're going to get into the college football playoff then would be if 3 ACC teams wind up making the college football playoff, because then we're talking about the loser of the title game. And based on the current landscape, how could anyone make the case that 3 ACC teams are going to get in?
Well, okay, let's say Georgia Tech goes undefeated the rest of the season. That means they beat Georgia, and then they lose the ACC title game to, I guess, who would they be playing against in that scenario?
Either Virginia or
Louisville. Maybe
Virginia. Louisville's probably a tricky one for Miami, because if you have 3 teams with the same record, if Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami have the same record, then Louisville has the win over Miami, who has a win over Notre Dame.
Transitive theory.
That could be tricky.
But then do they have a loss to Georgia Tech in the title game, or do they have a win over Georgia Tech in the title game? Like, I think, to Mike's point, last year when the rankings came out, we were all screaming about Alabama and South Carolina and all these SEC teams. And then it turned out Alabama lost to Oklahoma in a historic and embarrassing fashion at the end of the season, which no one saw coming. So it is the beginning of November. I think I was being a little sarcastic about the loss at the end of the season, but I think that my bigger point is losing the weekend before the first ranking comes out is definitely like one of the worst times to lose, I think.
Yeah.
Especially to a conference opponent that has 3 losses already, including two Big 12 teams that are not even in the Big 12 race right now, TCU and Baylor. So I think, it was a bad timing for a Miami loss. But also, to Mike's point, they have not been playing well lately, and they need to win out and get very, very lucky, just like a lot of the other teams in that teens range.
I've got loads of questions for you. A month ago, everyone said Texas was done in the CFP, and they win against a hurt John Mateer, edge out Kentucky, need overtime to beat Mississippi State, almost collapsed.
Mississippi State sneaky decent.
No, I know, and Georgia's going to find out. Stark Vegas. But Texas is back in there. I think the most interesting thing for me is the lack of discussion when it comes to the Big Ten and how bad the bottom third of that conference is. When you look at these spreads, a lot of good teams are getting fat off the bottom of this conference, and you have a team like Oregon, who's only favored by 6.5 in a very tricky spot against Iowa. You have them in the top 10. They lost their only ranked game, their only game against a now ranked opponent by double digits at home. Their best win is against Northwestern. I don't really understand this one. This feels like a reputation Big Ten propaganda machine.
And I wonder how much the Penn State win in overtime on the road is still counting towards Oregon's resume, even though Penn State has now been a much worse team since then, although they also lost their starting quarterback who threw the game-losing interception in that game, Mike. Your point about Oregon, though, is well taken. So this season they have beaten Oklahoma State, terrible team, Oregon State, terrible team, Rutgers, Wisconsin. It's just they haven't had to play very many tough teams. But this is where I also think that in a lot of ways, the end of the season, these things kind of will take care of themselves, and especially with Texas too. Texas still has to play Texas A&M. Texas A&M is the number 3 team in the country. That's going to be a obviously very important game. They also still have to play Georgia. They still have to play Arkansas. Arkansas, with their interim Bobby Petrino head coach, has still given teams a really tough time in the SEC. Oregon still has to play USC, who is still ranked. They still have to play Iowa, like you said. They play Washington, who is ranked. There's still, like, a lot of these teams have the hardest part of their schedule still coming up. So I think, the first week of the rankings, you consider where the committee is putting the teams now, and it's informative of where things will head, but there still could be massive shakeups in all of this as these teams still have to play really hard conference teams down the stretch. The other thing is that I think the mega conferences are stupid. I think that it was a mistake to have divisionless 17-team conferences, and we are seeing just the evidence of that second year in a row.
Why do you say that?
So stupid.
Why do you say that?
Because if you want to compare like Big Ten teams and common opponents just within the conference, a lot of these teams just don't have to play that difficult of like Mike said, like there's a lot of this Oregon schedule specifically. There's a lot of bad teams in the bottom half of this conference, and you get lucky this year that you don't have to play Ohio State. Ohio State is another team. Mike, let's say that they win out, beat Michigan, which is a big if given their history. What is their best win? I guess it's Washington on the road.
I guess it all depends on what happens with Texas. Right now, that was such a marquee game. I don't think people can disassociate that was 1 versus 2 at the time. It's weird because those are two big propaganda machines going there. But to answer Zaz's question too and supplement your point, last year Indiana didn't really play anybody, found a way in the CFP just because the conference they're in. Oregon's in that position right now. We have 2 straight years in the ACC where Miami's OLI, and they don't have the opportunity to play Georgia Tech. They don't have the opportunity to play Virginia. They did have the opportunity against Louisville this year. Last year, all the teams in that mix didn't play one another. I do think it gets mitigated some next year with a lot of these conferences moving to a 9-game schedule, though, right, Jess?
I think it actually makes it a little bit harder if the conferences are not willing to play hard out-of-conference teams. Like if you look at a team like Oregon specifically, I mean, their out of conference this year was pretty easy. Oregon State.
Why
Oklahoma
play anybody
State.
out of conference? Miami played everybody out of conference, and it doesn't matter.
I agree. I understand the argument against it, but I think the argument for it is that, like, if you do lose a couple games, having one of those wins is going to get you into the playoff. But I think that it makes it harder for the committee and for fans if there's no common Power 4 opponents between any of these teams. But I understand your point if you think head-to-head doesn't matter. I would say head-to-head still matters, but Miami just couldn't afford to lose to a 3-loss SMU team.